Welcome to Biology 160, Introduction to Anatomy and Physiology. Today we're going to be talking about the cardiovascular system. When you think about the cardiovascular system, the first thing that comes to most people's mind, I'm sure, is the heart. And that is a major part of the cardiovascular system. And that's where we're going to start our lecture today. But that is not all there is to the cardiovascular system. This is a very complex system and a very important system, and one that reaches every part of the body and affects every part of the body's function and ability to carry out its work to keep us alive. So, as you know, the heart is found in the thoracic cavity underneath the rib cage, and one of the jobs of the rib cage is to protect our heart. It's not a very large organ, about the size of your fist. So if you hold your fist up, and that's about the size of your heart. But this is a pretty amazing organ because it works constantly, every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It does have some relaxation time, so the muscles of your heart are moving between relaxation and pumping, but your heart has to continually pump all day long, so it does its job pretty amazingly. You can see in this picture here where the heart is located relative to the ribs in your rib cage. So if you look at the ribs here and you can count down, so here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ribs, and in this space between the fifth and sixth ribs, the fifth intercostal space we call it. So the space, if you count the spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's where the bottom of your heart is located, and we call this the apex. Your heart is located right in the middle of your body, so you can see this midline here. This is the midline of the body, so it's located right in the middle, but it does point towards the left just a little bit. And this apex, which comes to some sort of a point here, is going to point down towards the left side. So when we're talking about the heart, it's important to remember our anatomical position. As we're talking about the heart, the left side of the heart is your left side. So when you're looking at somebody else and you say the left side, again, you're talking about their left side. And the same for you. So this is the left side of the heart here. So this person here is facing us. Put some eyes on him here. Here's his eyes and his mouth, right? Okay, so he's facing us, and so this is his or her left side over here, and this is the right side. The top of the heart is called the base. And notice that the top of the heart is right below that second rib. That's where your arteries are going to be coming out, and your veins, your vena cava, are going to be coming back into the heart. And then you can see the diaphragm here, located just below the heart, and we'll talk more about the diaphragm in a later lecture. This is a picture looking from the top down. So this is a cross section of the body, and you can see this is the vertebrae here in the back. Here are our lungs on the sides here, so our right and our left lung, and then here's the heart, and you can see that the heart is close to the front of the body. So here's the sternum. So all this between your heart and the outside world is this sternum, your rib cage there, and then there's a few layers of tissue. So it's right up there close to the front of the body. So here's another picture of the heart. You can see the diaphragm again down below. You can see the lungs, and here you can see the aorta coming out and the vena cava. The vena cava coming back in, and then you also have the pulmonary trunk, the veins and arteries going to the lungs, and also the veins coming back to the heart from the lungs to pick up that oxygen. We have what's called the parietal pericardium, and that's one of the layers of tissue that is around the heart. We'll talk about that just a little bit more in just a minute. In this picture, though, here's the apex pointed out here, and then I also want you to notice this tissue here, the fibrous connective tissue connecting the diaphragm and the heart to each other as well. So the heart has this fibrous tissue all around the outside pericardium that holds it in place inside the body. Let's now look at the anatomy of the heart itself, the different layers that make up the heart. On the outside here we have what's called the fibrous pericardium. And this is a fibrous membrane that holds the heart in place, attaches it to the walls of the thoracic cavity. Underneath that we have the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. And then we also have the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. So we have this serous membrane that we've seen before and we've talked about before, always made up a double layer. This is, notice how it is a continuous covering. So this is the serous membrane is the one that we talked about, where this is like putting your fist into a balloon. So it's a double membrane. In the middle here we have serous fluid that is secreted into this space that allows the heart to move with little friction, so it's not going to rub against the other organs that it comes in contact with. So we have the parietal layer is the outside layer, and then deep to that we have the visceral layer of the pericardium. And we're going to see this serous membrane surrounding most all of the organs in our body. We also have the serous membrane is a thin layer of epithelium tissue, and again that's its job, is to secrete this fluid to keep from friction. And I was going to mention we also have the pleural membrane, which is around the lungs, and that's going to come in contact. You'll also see that as we talk about the respiratory system. The visceral layer of the pericardium is called the epicardium, and the epicardium is also the very outer layer of the heart. So the serous membrane is continuous here, and it forms, this continuous layer forms the outer layer of the heart. So it's the inner layer of the serous membrane, also the very outer layer of the heart. And we'll see this epi again at the beginning of this word. That's going to tell you it's on the outside. Next we have the myocardium. When we're discussing the heart, the myocardium is, you can think of it, this is the main part of the heart. This is the cardiac muscle. So when we're talking about heart muscle, cardiac muscle, the myocardium, that's where that is found. So this makes up the bulk of the wall of the heart, and this is what actually does the contracting. Think back to the different parts of the cardiac muscle, the features of the cardiac muscle. It is striated like the skeletal muscle. So it has the actin and myosin filaments that are going to cause this cardiac muscle to contract. It is each cell does have only a single nucleus, so it's not multinucleated like the skeletal muscle is. But all of these heart cells, cardiac muscle cells, are interconnected by what are called gap junctions, and where the two cells come together we have intercalated discs. So if you have two heart cells here, and remember that they're also branched and come in contact with each other, so they may look something like this. Have another heart muscle coming off over here, and we'll say that we'll just draw it like that. Each one has a single nucleus. This is our intercalated disc. But in the walls here, where the two cells come together, we have what are called gap junctions. And these are protein junctions that hold the cells together but allow for movement between the cells. So the cardiac muscles are all able to contract at the same time because they're able to communicate with each other through these gap junctions. Finally, on the very inside of the heart, we have what's called the endocardium. Endo, meaning the very inside. And this is a thin layer, as you can see, of epithelium tissue as well. And it's lining all of the inside of the heart. And it's also continuous with the blood vessels. So as the blood vessels, for example, the aorta or the pulmonary artery, as they're leaving the heart, this endocardium is lining those vessels as well. So those are the parts of the heart. Something interesting to point out here, we have 4 chambers of the heart, and we'll look at that a little bit more in just a minute. But this is a cross-section, transverse section of the heart. And what we see here is this is the myocardium. This is a layer of the myocardium. And this is the left ventricle. Over here we have what's called the right ventricle. Notice the difference in size of the myocardium layer between these two sides. So the left ventricle, the myocardium, is much thicker than the myocardium in the right ventricle. Both sides of the heart here are going to have the epicardium on the outside, the myocardium, and then the endocardium on the very inside. But the left ventricle is much thicker, the myocardium is much thicker. This is the stronger side of the heart because this is the side that is pumping that blood all over the body. Whereas the right side is just pumping it to the lungs and back, so it's not as thick. So the myocardium, the thickness of the myocardium is telling you how strongly that part of the heart is pumping. Alright, here's a little video showing the heart pumping. And we're going to look at the different, it's going to point out the different parts of the heart. So here's our heart. We have atria and we have ventricles. These are the different parts of the heart. We have the base of the heart, which we already talked about, in the apex. So the ventricles are the two chambers in the below, and the atria are the chambers above. We also have the superior vena cava and the aorta that are coming out. And then we also have the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary veins that are coming back into the heart. This is the right side of the heart, and then we have the left side of the heart. Each side is made up of an atria and a ventricle. Between the two atria we have a septum, and between the two ventricles we also have a septum that separate the different chambers. So what happens is the blood is flowing in from the vena cava into the right atria, and from there it goes into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle pumps it out into what's called the pulmonary circulation, which is going to the heart, to the lungs, to pick up blood, to pick up oxygen. Then it comes back into the left atria, and from there it goes into the left ventricle. And then the left ventricle then pumps it out the aorta into the body, and then we continue this back into the left ventricle again. So the top two chambers are going to be called atria, or each one is called an atrium. That's singular. So we have the right atrium, the left atrium, which are the atria. Then we have the left ventricle, the right ventricle, and then the left ventricle. And each of these, and they have the different jobs. So the blood's always entering the atria first, and then it moves into the ventricles, and then it's going to get pumped to wherever it needs to be pumped. The heart also has valves in between the atria and the ventricle, and between the ventricles and the blood vessels that are moving out from the heart. So as the heart's pumping, you can see these valves working as the blood's moving through, and so we want to take a minute here and look at the different valves. The valves are actually at least part of what causes the heart sounds that we think of. So as these valves are opening and closing as our heart is pumping, that's part of the sound that we're hearing. We have first what are called atrioventricular valves. We have two of these, and these are located between, if you look at the word, between the atria and the ventricles, and that's where they get their name. So they're called the AV valves. Notice here that the AV valves are held by some Cordite tendinae, is what they're called, and these are little cord-like connective tissue-like fibers that hold the AV valves in place. The AV valves, we have what's called the bicuspid and the tricuspid valves, depending on the number of cusps of the valve. The right AV valve is called the tricuspid valve, and the left AV valve is called the bicuspid valve. They both work in the same way, but they're shaped a little bit differently. One has fewer cusps than the other, so they call it the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve. We also have some valves between the ventricles and the vessels that are leaving the body, and we call these the semilunar valves. So there's two semilunar valves. There's one semilunar valve between the right atrium and the pulmonary artery, which is going to the lungs, and then we have one semilunar valve, or SV valve, between the left ventricle and the aorta, which is then going to the body. So the function of all of these valves is to keep the blood flowing in the same direction. So we don't want any backflow of the blood. If we have any backflow happening, then the heart's not going to be able to pump as efficiently. So what's happening with these valves here is as the ventricle is pumping and pushing the blood into the vessels, once that as the ventricle is pumping, there's enough pressure to push the blood out. But as that ventricle stops pumping, the pressure is going to drop, so the blood will have a tendency to move backwards. So it's going to come back towards that lower pressure. So the blood's always going to move from high pressure to low pressure. So it wants to come back towards that lower pressure, but that's where the semilunar valve comes in. As it closes, it keeps that blood from flowing back into the heart. So basically the valves are one-way valves. They're making sure the blood is flowing in one direction. We don't have any sort of backflow. If something happens to your valves, you are going to start having some backflow. If they're leaky or something like that, that's going to cause the heart to have to work harder, and that can lead to fatigue and eventually possibly an infarction or a myocardial infarction, or what we known as a heart attack. And so we want to make sure that these valves are functioning correctly. If there is a faulty valve, then they can be replaced surgically. There's a number of different ways: a synthetic valve, or they can get a replacement valve from a cadaver, or even use a pig valve, a valve from a pig, in order to replace these and make sure that they're working correctly. So this is a very important part of the circulation. So the way the circulation works is like this. So the blood is going to come from the body through the vena cava, and it's going to start filling up the right atrium. So as the blood is flowing back into the right atrium, the AV valve is going to be open. It's going to be relaxed. And so as the right atrium is filling up, the right ventricle will also be filling up passively as the blood's flowing in. So we're filling up the left ventricle here as well as the atrium. So as the blood fills up, at some point as it becomes filled up, finally the atria is going to contract, and that's going to push the rest of the blood in the atria into the right ventricle. And that's going to make sure, and so the AV valve is going to be open during all this time. The atria, the right atrium pumping is important in pushing in that last little bit of blood, but if for some reason your atrium isn't working, because the ventricle is filling passively, your heart can still function. So although the atria are important, they're not as important as the ventricles as far as function goes. But they do push some more blood in and prepare that ventricle to pump. So notice that the semilunar valves at this point are closed, and the AV valve is open, and so now we pumped it into the atria. Now at this point, now the ventricles are going to contract. The atria both contract at the same time, and the ventricles both contract at the same time. We're going to look at them each in turn here. So both of our atria have now contracted. Now the ventricles are going to start contracting. As that contraction starts, notice this forces the AV valve closed. So none of the blood is going to move back into the atrium. We don't want it to leak back into the atrium. That's not going to, our heart's not going to be working well if that's happening. The semilunar valves are still closed. There's not enough pressure in the ventricle yet to push that open. But the ventricle's full, the AV valves are closed, the semilunar valves are also closed. Then as the pressure rises and mounts, what's going to happen is this is going to force the semilunar valves open. You can see the Cordite tendinae here that are holding those AV valves from flapping back open. So as the blood is pushing against them, these cords, these tendon-like structures here, keep those from flapping in backwards, kind of like an umbrella. So if you were to break these cords here, these would flap open backwards, and the blood would be able to flow back in. So that's what those do. They hold it there. Alright, so now as the ventricles continue to contract, finally there's going to be enough pressure to force the semilunar valves open, and the blood's going to flow out into in this case, the pulmonary arteries. And so now the semilunar valves are open, the atrium are closed, and then the AV valves are closed, and then as they flow back around, as the blood flows back in to the next part, or as that blood is flowing out in the blood vessels, the ventricle is going to relax, the pressure is going to drop, and so the blood's going to start trying to flow back into the ventricle, and this is then when the semilunar valves close to keep that backflow from happening. So here you can see the semilunar valve open, so notice how the blood can flow right through. But then as the blood tries to flow back, the semilunar valves close, act almost like a little cup to hold that blood from going back into the ventricle. So again, this keeps it as a one-way circuit around the body. And then once the blood leaves the right ventricle, goes to the lungs, it's going to come back and it's going to enter the right atrium. The whole system happens again. So the right atrium, as it's leaving, it goes to the lungs and comes back. So it's going to go into the left atrium, and then the whole system continues. So the left atrium is going to be passively filling the left ventricle as well, and then the atrium is going to contract, move the rest of the blood into the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle is going to contract, the AV valves are closed, semilunar valves will open, the blood gets pushed out into the aorta, then to the body, then as the left ventricle relaxes, the semilunar valve is going to close, and we continue on in this way. Here's a little video about the pumping of the heart. So right now you can see the tricuspid valve is open, the blood is passively filling up into the right ventricle. As that continues to fill, then the right atrium is going to contract and fill the right ventricle the rest of the way up. And then the AV, then as the ventricle begins to contract, the right ventricle, that's going to push against the AV valve, the tricuspid valve, and force that closed. And the semilunar valve is still going to be closed until that there's enough pressure to force it open and the blood moves out into the pulmonary artery. Then as the blood tries to flow back, the semilunar valve will close. Then from the pulmonary artery, you're going to come back in the pulmonary veins, passively filling the left atrium, which will then begin to passively fill the left ventricle as the bicuspid valves open. So now our left ventricle is beginning to fill. Bicuspid valve is open. Then the left atrium is going to contract and fill the left ventricle the rest of the way. Notice that the semilunar valve here is still closed. Notice how the walls of the heart also extended, so it's stretching the heart walls, and that's good. And then the left ventricle is going to start contracting, causing the left AV or the bicuspid valve to close. And then the semilunar valves, as the pressure builds, are going to be forced open. The blood's going to leave in the aorta to the body. Then as the left ventricle relaxes, the semilunar valve will close, and the heart will go back to its former function. Notice here how the left and right ventricle are both pumping at the same time. The left and right atria are also pumping at the same time. So that is how the circulation of blood works. I do want you to know how the blood is moving around the body, the movement of blood around the body, and next time we'll talk a little bit more about circulation and how that all happens.
Thank you.